Hola estudiantes! Today's lesson is going to be a review of all of the different kinds of Spanish verbs that you have learned in Spanish 1. So we're going to go over regular verb conjugation in the present tense, irregular verbs, stem-changing verbs, as well as some irregular yo form verbs and also verbs known as go verbs. So let's get started. Alright, the very first thing we're going to start with is present tense conjugation of AR, ER, and IR verbs. So at this point, this should be pretty easy for you, but just to review the AR verb conjugation chart, of course you need to know where all the subject pronouns are: yo, tú, él, ella, usted, nosotros, nosotras, vosotros, vosotras, ellos, ellas, and ustedes. And then you know all of the conjugation endings. So for AR verbs, the verb conjugation endings are o, as, a, amos, ais, and an. And we're going to review the process in just a minute. But right now, we're just reviewing the conjugation chart and the endings for AR verbs. So also remember with the chart, when you are conjugating for a singular subject, you're always going to go with a third box. So this box is singular. So even if it's one person, one item, one thing, you're going to go with that conjugation. And then this box, the sixth box, is plural, and so anytime you're talking about a plural subject, you're going to go with that box. So the A is for singular, an is for plural. So the conjugation chart doesn't change, but now when we talk about ER, IR verbs, the endings do. So for ER verbs, remember the conjugation chart's the same, but we're just going to change the endings. So these four forms, all we're really doing is changing the E's to A's, and the yo form always stays the same. So for ER, it's o, es, e, amos, ace, and en. So remember, if it's an ER verb, the nosotros and vosotras forms always remain E. The same is going to be true for IR verbs. So since it's an IR verb, and nosotros and vosotros forms do not change, it's going to stay in I. IR verb conjugation is very similar to ER. These four are the same. So o, es, e, and en. And like I was saying before, imos and is, the nosotros and vosotros forms, those remain in I. Also, remember that there are accent marks. So for AR verbs, it's on the A because it's AR. ER verbs, it's on the E. And IR verb, it's on the I for the vosotros forms. Okay? So that was just a quick review of the conjugation chart. Now we're just going to compare the conjugation process and the endings that you put on. So remember, the process is that you take off the infinitive ending, which is AR, ER, and IR. You have to know what your subject is, so you put that on, and then you have a conjugated verb. So for example, yo hablo, tú comes, and ellos viven. We're going to break that down just a little bit more for anybody that needs a thorough review of how to conjugate verbs. Alright, so you start with an infinitive, and in Spanish there are three kinds. There are AR, ER, and IR infinitives, or what they essentially are verbs. They're verbs in their purest form. So we start with that. And then we have to know our subject pronouns, so who we're talking about. And those are yo, tú, él, ella, usted, nosotros, vosotros, ellos, ellas, and ustedes. And then the second step, or actually, that could be like a pre-step. The very first step in conjugating a verb, after you know the infinitive, is you take off the AR. So you remove it, and what is left is called the stem. So if you wanted your subject to be yo, you'd remove the AR, and then you'd be left with NAD, nad. And you put on the conjugation ending for yo, which is o, and you have nado, I swim. Tú, you take off the AR, and then nadas. For él, ella, usted, it would be nada. Nosotros, nadamos. Vosotros, nadáis. Ellos, ellas, and ustedes, nadan. Okay, so that shows you pretty clearly the process of conjugating in case anyone needed to review that or if you had any questions about it. Now we're just going to speed things up a little bit, and we're also going to compare correr and escribir since they are ER, IR verbs. So we do the same thing. We remove the ER, and we're left with the stem. And to the stem, we just add the subject ending. So o, es, e, hemos, es, and en for ER verbs. Then we do the same thing for IR verbs. Remove the IR ending. We have the stem that's left, and then we go ahead and add our subject endings, our conjugation endings. So o, es, e. Now since this is an IR verb, we're going to keep this in I. Hemos, is, and en. Okay, yeah, that's it. That's conjugation. So that was just a real quick review of how to conjugate present tense, ER, AR, and IR Spanish verbs. If you need any more of a thorough lesson on that, you can go watch my conjugation video. Okay, moving on. Now we're going to go to irregular verbs. These are the two irregular verbs that both mean to be, ser and estar. And even though they mean the same thing, remember they are used uniquely. Ser is used to explain things that take time to change, and estar are things that change easily. And so the conjugation for these verbs are completely unique, especially ser. It doesn't follow the normal conjugation pattern for an ER verb at all, so you must learn it and memorize it. And then for estar, it is pretty similar to AR conjugation endings, except it has these little accent marks here. And then for the yo form, it ends in oy instead of just o. So it's for ser, it's soy, eres, es, somos, sois, and son. And for estar, it is estoy, estás, está, estamos, estáis, están. A few more tips before we move on to the acronym that I taught you to help you remember the difference between these two verbs. For estar, if you're having trouble remembering the conjugations, you can remember the song that I taught you that is in the tune of the Mexican hat dance song. So it goes, estoy, estás, está, estamos, estáis, están, estoy, estás, está, estamos, estáis, están. So that can help you remember the conjugation endings. Oh, and also a little rhyme that can help you remember that estar is only used for two situations, for locations and feelings. You can remember the rhyme that says, for how you feel and where you are, always use the verb estar. So those are two other little tricks that can help you when you're studying estar. Alright, so here's the acronym that we learned to help you remember the difference between these two to be verbs. So it's stop the elf. And what did that mean? So for stop, stop stood for ser, and that it broke down all of the reasons why we use ser, which is for time. O is for occupation and origin, and you can also put opinion in there if that helps you. And then P is for personality and physical traits. If all else fails and you have a sentence or a situation where you're trying to figure out which one you should use, remember, ser deals with things that take time to change. So if you have a situation where it doesn't fall into one of these categories, you can just ask yourself, does this take time to change? And then for elf, estar deals with things that describe location and feelings, and so that's what the L and the F stand for. And again, if you have a situation that doesn't fall in that one of those nice categories, you can ask yourself, does this change easily or not? And that will help you determine if you should use ser or estar. Okay, moving on to our next irregular verb that we learned, which is the go verb. It is ir. This is another fully irregular verb. It is an IR verb, and it conjugates with a V. So you just have to learn it, to practice it, and memorize it. So its conjugations are voy, vas, va, vamos, vais, and van. And here are some reminders about this verb. Ir means to go to a place or to an event. And many times it is followed by the word a, which means to a location. So since ir means to go, most times you're going to a location, and that is why. So that can be a good indication in a sentence that you should use ir. And then ir is also used in saying that people are going to do something, so the irá infinitive construction that we learned a little earlier in the year. All right, here is an ejemplo using the verb ir. El gato va a volver loco. The cat is going to go crazy. So you see ir here is conjugated for the cat and followed by a because it's going to go crazy. Right, our next irregular verb is actually only an irregular yo form verb, which is ver, which means to watch, like to watch a movie or to watch the TV. So ver la película, ver la tele is how we've learned this. And it's only irregular in the yo form. So some ejemplos would be if I wanted to say I watched the movie, I would, if this was just a regular form for yo, I would take off the ER and add an O. And I would say yo veo la película. But that's not a word. That doesn't make any sense. So we need to use the know that it's an irregular yo form and say yo veo la película. But everything else, everything in here, every other conjugation form is normal. So for example, I could say Callie ve los aves. Callie watches the birds.
You see birdies? Get 'em. Estás hablando con los aves.
So you have to remember that it's only irregular in the yo form. It's yo veo and not yo vo. Everything else is normal. The next verb is also an irregular yo form verb, which is saber, which is the verb that means to know how to or to know information. This is irregular in the yo form, and it is yo sé. If it were a regular verb and I wanted to say I know how to play and I didn't know that it was an irregular verb, I would take off the ER and say sabo. Yo sabo jugar. But that's what little babies say, and we don't want to say that. We don't want to sound like a baby. So we say yo sé jugar. So even when babies say that, moms have to correct their children and say, no, it is yo sé, not yo sabo. But everything else is normal, so I could say Callie sabe jugar también. Callie knows how to play too. Y le gusta mucho jugar.
Do you need help? Can you get down? What did she do?
The next two verbs are stem-changing verbs, or we can also call them boot verbs. We're going to focus first on jugar. Jugar means to play sports or any kind of a game. Jugar is a U to UE stem-changing verb, and what that means is that the U in the stem, after we take off the AR, we have what's called the stem. The U is going to stem change when we conjugate it in all of these four forms. It's going to stem change from U to UE. So instead of me saying yo jugo, I say yo juego. Tú juegas. Él, ella, usted juega. And then ellos, ellas, ustedes juegan. These are the only four that stem change. Now, these two forms, no matter how irregular a verb is, will not stem change. So you do not say juegamos, it is jugamos, and vosotros jugáis. So these two do not, but these four do. And pedir is a E to I stem changing verb. And pedir means to ask for, to order, or to request. And these four are the ones that stem change. So it's yo pido, tú pides, él, ella, usted pide, and ellos, ellas, ustedes piden. Again, these two do not stem change, so you're just going to treat it like a normal conjugation pattern. So pedimos and pedís. Also, we can call these boot verbs because if we draw a circle or a box around the forms that stem change, it forms what looks similar to a boot. So, stem changing verbs, jugar U to UE, pedir E to I, and stem changes in all the four forms that you see the boot. Here are a few other stem changing verbs, but these are also called go verbs. These are called go verbs because in the yo form, they end with go instead of just an O. So it's really a unique kind of irregular yo form because they all have a commonality. They all end in go. So for tener, it's yo tengo, and tener means to have. So it's I have, yo tengo, and venir means to come or to arrive to a place or to an event. So to say I arrive, you'd say yo vengo. Tener and venir are both E to IE stem changing verbs, so they're very similar to each other, but they differ in their meaning. And tener is an ER verb, venir is an IR verb, so those are the differences. But other than that, they're very similar. So in these three forms right here, they're going to stem change from E to IE. So it will be tú tienes, él, ella, usted tiene, and ellos, ellas, ustedes tienen. These are almost exactly the same, like I said. So for venir, it will be tú vienes, él, ella, usted viene, and ellos, ellas, ustedes vienen. Again, these two forms, nosotros and vosotros, will not stem change, so they will just be the same. So it's nosotros tenemos, vosotros tenéis, nosotros venimos, vosotros venís. So what you need to remember about these verbs is that they are go verbs, which means in these two forms, they end in go, so tengo and vengo, and they stem change in just these three forms right here, so you can call them shoe verbs instead of boot verbs because it doesn't come up as far. Alright, here's another stem changing verb, and shoe verb, and go verb. So this one is mantener. Mantener means to maintain. And when we first learned this verb, I did not talk to you about the fact that it was a stem changing verb because you did not know what that was at that time. But now that we know what stem changing verbs are, I'm going to go ahead and tell you that yes, this is also a stem changing verb. And it stem changes just like tener from E to IE. It is actually very similar to tener because you can see tener is right there in the word. So this E right here is going to stem change from E to IE in these three forms. So it's tú mantienes, él, ella, usted mantiene, ellos, ellas, ustedes mantienen. It is also a go verb, which means in the yo form, it ends with a go, so it's mantengo. And then these two forms, mantenemos and mantenéis, do not stem change. So some ejemplos of this verb would be yo mantengo mi salud. I maintain my health. Y ella mantiene su salud también. So both these kitties maintain their health. Such good kitties. Son gatitos buenos. Alright, and here's another irregular yo form. It is a go verb as well, but the rest of it is a normal verb. This is hacer, which means to do or to make. And in the yo form, instead of it just being able to take off the ER and add an O, it is hago, yo hago. So for example, if I wanted to say I exercise, you actually do not say yo hago, ejercicio. That isn't a word. So you're going to say yo hago ejercicio, and that is correcto. But the rest of the forms are just regular conjugation. So I can say ellos hacen la comida. They make the food. So everything else conjugates like a normal ER verb. Okay, another verb that is in irregular yo form is a go verb, and it is traer, which we just learned, which means to bring. And in the yo form, it is yo traigo. Everything else remains the same, but you say yo traigo for I bring, like yo traigo la piñata a la fiesta. I'm bringing the piñata to the party. Or could say yo traigo los dulces. I bring the candy to the party. Y el gato trae muchos dulces. Alright, so just to review, the go verbs that we know are hacer, traer, tener, venir, and mantener. So they are hago, traigo, tengo, vengo, and mantengo. So some examples using these verbs would be yo hago ejercicio, I exercise. Yo traigo la comida a la fiesta. Yo tengo la tarea. Yo vengo a la fiesta. And yo mantengo mi salud cada día. So you have to study these and remember that they are in a regular yo form, which is specifically called a go verb because they all end in go. And here are all the stem changing verbs that we went over. So remember, they are all different kinds of stem changing verbs, so you have to remember which one stem changes a specific way. So jugar is a U to UE stem changing verb. Pedir, E to I. Tener, E to IE. Venir, E to IE. And mantener, E to IE. The only ones that don't stem change are the ones with the little star or asterisk, and so those are the ones right there that do not stem change. Alright, here are all the irregular verbs that we've learned. So ir, which means to go, ser and estar, which are the to be verbs, and then these two are the ones that are only irregular in the yo form, so ver and saber. So those ones you have to make sure you practice them and learn them because a lot of their conjugations are very unique and they don't function like normal verbs. They are weird. Alright, so now we're going to talk about just the last few types of tenses that we've learned. And the first one is the informal future tense, which is ir a infinitive, which is saying that someone is going to do something. So the first step is you conjugate ir, and you figure out what the subject is, and so you conjugate that based on who is going to be doing the action. And then you add a, and then the infinitive, which is the unconjugated verb or the action the person is going to be doing. So some ejemplos of this would be, we are going to play. So we would say, vamos a jugar, because we are going is the conjugation of ir, so vamos. To is a, and play is jugar. And so to compare it to the formula, we say vamos is ir, a is a, and then the infinitive is jugar. So that is only for saying informally what someone is going to be doing. Alright, and just because I want to show you what the future tense conjugation endings are, because you will be learning them in Spanish too. So if you wanted to say you will study, this is actually very easy using future tense conjugation. All of the endings are the same for AR, ER, IR verbs, and so you're going to take the infinitive of study, which would be estudiar, and you put on the conjugation ending for you, which would be as, with an accent mark. So you'd simply say, tú estudiarás, or just estudiarás. And you can also say, vas a estudiar, which is what we learned this year. But just so you know what it looks like, that's what it looks like. Of course, it will not be on your final exam, but that's just to show you what you are going to be learning in Spanish 2 in the future. Okay, and the very last tense that we kind of learned, but you probably don't even realize that you learned it, is conditional tense, saying that I would. In this case, you recognize it as I would like, or I would like to. So saying, for example, I would like to dance, we know to say, me gustaría bailar. You don't know why we do that, but just because you are so close to going to Spanish 2, I'm going to go ahead and explain to you why you say that, just so you have a heads up for next year. So conditional tense is this conjugation chart, and it's very similar to future tense, and the process is the same. So you're going to take an infinitive, and you're going to add one of these endings, these subject endings, onto the end of it, no matter depending on what you want to say. So me gustaría is I would like to dance. So let's look at a couple other examples. So let's say I want to say I would play. I'm going to say jugaría, because I took the infinitive, which is jugar, and I put on the I ending, which would be ia. So now you put it together and say jugaría for I would play. Or we would sing, so you take the infinitive of sing, which is cantar, and then you add on the we ending. So then you have cantaríamos, we would sing. So it's very simple. And so that's something you have to look forward to learning next year. All right, and then lastly, don't forget that we learned how to talk about your likes and dislikes, stating that someone likes something. And this is also the same for love. So the process is you say who the subject is, the indirect object pronoun, so me, te, le, nos, os, les, and then you add gusta, or if it's a plural thing, you add gustan. Or if you love it, then you would use encanta or encantan. The only other thing I want to remind you of, since we're talking about the verb gustar, is a very important conjugation rule, which is you cannot conjugate two verbs side by side. For example, saying me gusta bailo, thinking that you are doing a good thing by conjugating bailar, is actually a bad thing. You are saying I dance, which we don't want to say that. We want to say I like to dance, which is me gusta bailar, and that is correcto. Another bad example would be saying te gusta comes? You like you eat? No, that sounds like caveman talk. So we want to say te gusta comer, and that is much, much better. Okay? And that is everything. So now what I want you to do is to pause the video, and what you have here is a mixture of regular verbs, irregular yo forms, go verbs, stem changing verbs, boot verbs, shoe verbs, the whole thing. And you have to identify which one is which and know how to conjugate it correctly in the blank, and you will have to do this on your final exam. So this is very, very good practice. Okay, so pause the video and practice on your own. Okay, ahora vamos a chequear las respuestas. Alright, número uno should be tocan, that is a regular verb. Number two should be juego, is a stem changing verb. Number three is eres. So this is eres because it is ser, since they are talking about describing someone's personality, and it's eres because it's the to form. So that you have to do a couple more steps to identify which one you're going to use and which form you're going to conjugate to. Number four should be compartimos, that is a regular verb. Number five, número cinco, Isabel va a la biblioteca. That is an irregular verb. Mariana y tú could be rompen or rompes, and that is a regular verb. Number 7 might have been a little tricky. Let's see if you got it. So since I said me gusta mucho, the next thing should be an infinitive. Me gusta mucho escuchar. And so even though it says me gusta mucho, we want to say I like to listen to music. We don't want to say I like I listen, or I like a lot I listen. That doesn't make sense. So it should be in the infinitive form. Me gusta mucho escuchar. Número 8, con quién viene. And this is a stem changing verb, E to IE. It's also a go verb, but it wasn't in the yo form, so. But just remember it's a go verb. And número 9, mi papá es un doctor buenísimo. So it is es, ser, because it's talking about an occupation. Okay, so part 2 of the examples. If you did not get a chance to do these because you don't have the paper, then please pause this again and try these on your own before you listen to all the answers. But if you've already done it, then we'll continue on. Número 10, ¿cuántos hermanos tienes tú? So remember, in a question, the subject is after the verb, so tienes. And that is a stem changing verb, E to IE. Isaac y Noé piden unas hamburguesas. So this is a E to I stem changing verb. That's why it's piden. Número 12, tú estás en el sótano. You're in the basement. So that's a location. That's why it's estar. And then it's estás because of the tú form. Número 13 should be recibir. That might have been a little tricky too, but we have voy a, ir a infinitive. So it should be recibir. I am going to receive. Am I going to receive my money now? ¿Voy a recibir mi dinero ahora? And recibir is just a regular verb. Número 14. Ay, papi, yo no estoy muy bien. Because it says me duele el estómago, so you are not feeling well. So it should be estoy, and estar is an irregular verb. Número 15. Yo hago ejercicio. So this one is an irregular yo form. It's a go verb. So it's only that way in the yo form. And número 16. Nosotros jugamos muchos deportes. And that one is a stem changing verb, but not in the nosotros form. All right, hopefully you did great. Make sure you study these verbs before you take your final exam. If you have any questions, please bring them to class, and I would be more than happy to help you there. Hasta la próxima.